And so, good afternoon, and here we are. This is Sarah Green, live on Clear Source Radio with Creating Connection. This is my initial launch broadcast, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys this afternoon. I have a lot of things to share with y'all. My main goal was to let you know who I am and where I come from and why I do what I do, and give you a little bit of background about myself. And hopefully do what Clear Source does, which is inspire some of you to chase your dreams or go after what you want, or maybe make some little changes in your life that will make your world and the world of your loved ones and others a better place. I am broadcasting from Dallas, Fort Worth, from my office. I own a company called Heartlight Services, and I am an energy medicine practitioner and a family builder. I primarily focus on children and families that have childhood trauma, attachment disorders, behavioral disorders, those sorts of fun things, and that's where I focus. But I also am a published author, essayist, and I'm a intuitive and an empath and a healer. So there's a lot of different pieces to the pie as far as what I do in my day-to-day life in my office. But radio is something I've always enjoyed doing. I've done a lot of shows over the last couple of years and have been lucky enough to be invited to participate in television and radio. And it's something that I really enjoy, and am hopefully going to share a message with all of you that will make a difference somewhere out in the world. After all, that's why we're all here, right? I thought I would start with kind of telling a little bit about how I got to where I was, or where I am now. From where I was, I had a typical suburban Dallas, Fort Worth childhood. My parents divorced when I was 10, as did most everyone's parents back in the 80s, and I guess we're still following that trend. But grew up, just a Southern girl, normal, lived in the same house most of my life, had really dedicated and loving parents, beautiful, beautiful grandmother, my Grammy. She's someone I write about often, and my grandfather, and they were people that were highly inspirational to me and still continue to be, even though my grandparents have passed on. Grew up typical, graduated high school, got married too young, had a beautiful daughter, got divorced, got married again, had another beautiful daughter. I'm grateful for those two first marriages because they brought me the gifts of my girls, and that is something that I wouldn't change for anything. I got married a third time and had a son. He is now 14. My girls are 21 and 17, so I got married a third time. And going into that marriage, I really brought the inspiration or the call, what I felt like was the call to be a foster mom. I remember when I was in high school, my good friend Jenna, I think she might be listening, her mother, they were foster parents, and they fostered babies in the interim between when the babies were born and when they could go to their adoptive parents, and they always had babies. And I remember just thinking, man, that is so cool. They just have these kids and they love on them and they send them on their way, and I want to do that someday. So when my son was small, very young, and my husband and I determined that we weren't going to have any more children, we decided that we would perhaps foster. I brought the conversation to the table, and we went to some informational meetings, but our children were small, and as it can be when you're a stay-at-home mom or a working mom, parenting is overwhelming. And so I had a small, I think when my son was born, my daughter was 7, and my next youngest daughter was 4 years younger. She was 3, and then I had a baby. So they were spaced pretty closely, and we made the decision to homeschool our kids. So the kids were homeschooled, and it just wasn't a good time to be a foster mom. And so the kids grew up and they got older, and the conversation would come up and the conversation would shift, and we would put it off and decide that we weren't going to do it. But it was just this calling to serve kids. I always joke that I'd have 13 children if my husband would let me, and thankfully he didn't let me, because I came to find out from being a foster mom and having 8 children placed with me at once that I'm not as gifted of a mother to large groups of children as I am to smaller groups. But we decided, I think the kids it was in 2011 was when we decided to take the plunge and attend the classes, or at least I coerced my husband into it. I coerced him into taking the classes and taking the plunge with me and going through that process. And for those of you that don't know, the process is pretty labor intensive. It's very invasive. You have to open your financial records. You open up details of your sex life. You open up details of your emotional life, your background, your history, your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, your cabinets, your cupboards, your drawers. Everything in your life is inspected and looked at and examined very, very closely. There's many, many training hours. I think that they weren't all helpful. And in a future broadcast, I want to talk about, and I'm going to have some guests on that are foster parents and talk about, some changes and shifts that people feel like need to be made in the world of foster care. But today, I'm going to just kind of tell our story and what we went through. We went through all of the training, all of the process, and we were very close to the end. And actually, this was in 2009. 2009, yeah. So we went through almost all of it in 2009 into 2010. And in August of 2010, my stepfather, Sean Askinosie, he owns a company called Askinosie Chocolate, which you guys should check out because they do beautiful, not only do they make beautiful chocolate, but he's a socially responsible entrepreneur and he's won lots of awards for the beautiful work he does in the world through the business of chocolate. Anyway, so my stepfather, I call him my bonus dad, Sean called me one day in August and said, "So you want to go to Tanzania?" And I said, "Of course." And he said, "On Sunday?" And this was Thursday. And I said, I don't know. Yeah, I think I can do that. So I hung up with him and I talked to my kids. And I'll never forget, my daughter Faith said, "Mom, you got to go." And it had never occurred to me in my wildest dreams as a mother, as a stay-at-home mom, primarily is what I'd done my entire adult life, to get on a plane and head to a developing country and leave my children behind for 2 weeks. It had never been in my consciousness that it was something that you could possibly do. It did become something that was very much in my consciousness later on down the line, and I'll talk about that. But so I ran and got everything together, and I got my shots at the health department, and I got my passport, and I got on a plane with my bonus dad and a large group of high school students who had gone through a program that he has at his factory, teaching kids how to be socially and ethically responsible entrepreneurs. I loaded up all of the kids, or loaded up myself, got on the plane, took a lot of long flights, made it to Tanzania, and fell in love. And if you have not been to Africa, every person that I've spoken to that's been anywhere in Africa, but I think there's something especially magical about Tanzania, or that portion of the continent, that is just magical. The colors are brighter and the smells are more potent, and the atmosphere and the environment and the joy in the people, it shifted everything for me. And one of the stories I wanted to tell today was how these kids and I, were in Tanzania, and we had taken this 21-hour bus ride across the countryside from Dar es Salaam down to the border, into an Mbeya, to this little town called Kiela, and then even outside that where our farmer group was that grows our cocoa beans. And we showed up, and we were staying in a little hotel outside the village, and we were invited to church. And we went to the church in the village, and we arrived, and the people were celebrating, and they were singing, and they were clapping their hands, and they were dancing in joy, and they were just celebrating our arrival. And everybody on the bus had tears. I don't think any of us have ever been welcomed in that way. So we got off the bus and we went into the church, and they'd planned a special service for us that day. And one of the things that I was so touched by was when it was time to give the offering, everybody lines up to go up to the front of the church and to tithe or to give their offering. And the culture and what's expected, it was explained to us, is that you give more than you can comfortably afford. So you don't give just enough or just your 10%. You give to your God until it hurts, until it's a little uncomfortable. But in return, you expect your God to take care of you and to ease your discomfort. And it's an incredibly beautiful and powerful moving act of faith that occurs in that church. And one of the women that went up to the front of the church had a small basket, and in it she had 3 eggs. And knowing what I know about, what was explained to me about that offering, I knew that that was perhaps a large portion of her nutrition for the week. And it was uncomfortable for her, and she was giving away the little bit that she had to feed herself. And that was it. Not only was I in this little church that was filled with so much beautiful singing and joy, and it was simple, on the other side of the world, and I knew the Creator was there in that space, and He was more present in that space than I've ever felt Source or God or whatever you want to call it. He was in that space, and that woman was giving the last little bit that she had to give. And you can't experience moments like these without having them change who you are. And that's what happened. It changed who I was. And I left that service that day, and I got on the bus, and I was being really honest with myself. And I think there's some video of this from the trip somewhere. I got on that bus, and I realized that I had been really taking my time about doing this whole foster care thing. And I had not, I was like, my life is really comfortable. And I lived in a beautiful upper middle class neighborhood and a huge home with a pool, and we entertained all the time, and we traveled, and we wanted for nothing. We had luxury vehicles, and and that's comfortable. It's comfortable to sit in that, and it's comfortable to be in the space of just doing your life and not extending yourself. But after having that experience and watching those people and where they come from, and the joy that they find in the simplest of things and the smallest moments, and the ability that they have to give and to trust that they're going to be taken care of even when they're giving to the point of discomfort, I realized that I could no longer sit in my comfortable life. I could no longer sit and be comfortable and not get a little uncomfortable. And so I knew that I had to go home, and I had to open my home, and I had to bring these kids in and create chaos and discomfort and disrupt my children's lives and disrupt my marriage. And I knew it was going to be hard. I had no idea how hard, but nor did I have any idea how much I was going to be blessed. And that's where the magic was. So anyway, I came back from Tanzania, a changed person. I was super obnoxious for a while about getting on to my family about wasting water and wasting food, and the excess that we take for granted here, and how it was shameful to me. It allowed me to sit in gratitude so much more and realize how, my blessings of just being able to turn on a tap and get water, or if my children were sick, I could take them and I could get them medicine, or I could get in a car, or I could turn on my air conditioner. I mean, all of those things you just, you take for granted. And that's where I shifted, and that's where I changed and stopped taking those things for granted, was when I came back from Tanzania. So I came back and I finished the licensing process, and we got all that done, got our homesteading, and we got our shiny little piece of paper from the state of Texas that says you're a licensed home and you're allowed to care for other people's children. And then the wait began. I waited so long to do it, And then I was finally ready, and then and then you have to wait. And I waited, and I waited for 2 months. And I got calls. I got 11 phone calls asking if we could take children, and either we would say yes and the child would be placed elsewhere, or because of a timing issue or something that the child came with, we felt like that it wasn't a good fit for our family, and so we passed on those placements. But on Valentine's Day 2011, Valentine's Day 2011, my mom happened to be in town, and I woke up that morning and I was getting ready, and we were going to go to the mall and have a girls' day, and I came downstairs and I looked at my mother and I said, I'm going to get a baby today. And we weren't just licensed for babies, we were licensed for multiple children up to the age, I believe, of 5 at the time. But I just looked at her and I said that, and I don't really, and I went about my day, and we went to the mall, went to shopping, and I reached down in my purse and I pulled out my phone, and I realized I'd missed a bunch of calls from my caseworker, my agency manager. And I called her back, and she said, we have a placement for you. We have an infant. He was born drug exposed. He's 2 months old. He's been in the NICU this entire time. He was born addicted to opiates and methadone. He's had a really rough withdrawal. He's on medications to help still with his withdrawal and some of his symptoms of the withdrawal right now, but would you like me to submit you for placement? And I said, of course, yes. And she said, okay, now somebody's probably already taken placement, but I'm going to go ahead and submit you guys, and I'll keep you posted. So she calls me back a little bit later, and she says, that child has been placed elsewhere. I'm sorry, but, and I said, it's my fault. I missed the phone call. And then about another hour later, I was making dinner for my family. She called back and she said, I'm not sure what happened, but there was a misunderstanding, and I need you to be at the hospital in 45 minutes to spend the night with this baby and bring him home. They required us to spend the night with infants that were leaving the hospital to make sure that we could manage their medications, and so that the hospital staff could just make sure that we could appropriately, take care of the child, and they were there for us to answer medical questions. So in a flurry, I threw everything together, and I was in such a hurry that I got to the hospital and I forgot my wallet. And I was so nervous, and I was just thinking, they're going to give me they're giving me someone else's baby. And I knew that I was prepared. I had 3 children of my own. I'd been through all the training, the classes, but it was just like, wow, it was so surreal. They're giving me a baby. Wow. So I drive up to the hospital and I walk into the NICU, and I show up, and the nurses take me back to this little dark room, and there's this little baby laying there, and I hear very clearly, the second I lay eyes on this child, I hear someone say to me, this is your son. To the point to where I turned around and looked behind me because I thought someone was standing behind me, but I heard it, this is your son. And it was so strange to me because we had no intention of adopting. As a matter of fact, our whole goal getting into fostering was to motivate and to mentor and to guide and inspire birth parents and help them work their services and get their kids back. My whole goal as a foster, on my goal, what I wanted, and this comes important later, was to help people get their kids back. And I had no intention. We weren't even licensed to adopt at the time. We were licensed as a foster-only home. So I picked up this sick little guy, and I changed his diaper, and he wouldn't make eye contact, and I fed him his bottle, and I snuggled him, and I rocked him, and I started the process, of being his mom. And the next morning I woke up, and we packed everything up, and we signed the paperwork with the agency, and I brought him home in my car. And I walked into the house, and I showed up, and my daughter was 12 at the time, and she looked at me and she said, Mom, you brought me a baby. And that's pretty much, how it went. I mean, I have countless photos most first days of her caring for that baby, and he was so angry, and he was quite sick, and he was quite delayed and refused to make eye contact and was not home in his body. We watched this child over the period of the next few months come home to himself and return to his body, and his soul begin to fully settle into who he was. But it was a process. And in the meantime, I began to reach out to his birth mom and his father and try to mentor and guide them. And over the period of the next year, I helped her get into a rehab, and I worked along with the CASA volunteer. CASA is a court-appointed special advocate, and it's a brilliant program. And if you're not called to be a foster parent, I would encourage you to be a CASA, because it's beautiful, beautiful work. And it's a way to really make an impact in the life of a child. Anyway, so I worked with birth mom, and I tried to help her. And she had a very challenging childhood and a very challenging life and a very strong addiction and a lot of demons. And over that period of that year, towards the end of the first year of having him in our care, as we watched him grow, we realized that she was not going to be able to safely care for him. And not only was she not going to be able to safely care for him, we realized that we were willing to adopt, and we were willing to take him into our home full time, and that in order to do what needed to be done, which was to keep this child safe and to give him a hope and a future, to quote the Bible, we needed to hire an attorney and do what's called intervening in the case. And so we hired an attorney, and we raided our retirement, and we wrote a lot of checks, and we went to trial for custody. And I don't know if you can hear in my voice, but that was one of the darkest times of my life. I had so much guilt around fighting this woman for her child, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. And I knew that I got into foster care to serve the children first. And while it would have been amazing if she had been able to overcome her battles and overcome her challenges and create a safe home for her son, and had she done that, I would have handed him over in a heartbeat, but she just wasn't able. And his actual personal safety, in the opinion of CPS and the baby's attorney and the district attorney and everyone else involved, his actual personal physical safety would have been at risk. And so after a 6-day trial, birth mom's rights were terminated, which is never a victory. It was the end of that fight, but it was not a victory. It was a necessary thing that had to be done, and my heart was broken for her that day. I'll never forget the way that she looked and the sound that she made the day that her rights were terminated and the jury severed her bond legally with her son. So I just encourage anyone, I have a lot of foster parent listeners, remember the pain of the parents, and remember that even though these people are wounded and they are challenged, that they love deeply their children in their own way. And termination of rights is not a victory. It's something that has to happen to give children safety and permanency. And so while the adoption day that happened in November of 2012 was a beautiful day for my family, and it was, a gorgeous day for us and all of those things, the day that her rights were terminated was not a beautiful day. A loss happened. A loss happened for my son. He lost his connection to his birth mother legally. He lost his connection to his legal father and his birth father. And that's a wound. And so we need to remember with our adopted children that while we love them, and we love them just like they came from our own bodies, that in order for them to become ours, a wound has to occur. And we have to honor that wound, and we have to hold space for that, and just hold space for the birth parents, and recognize that and have awareness around it as we parent our adopted children. So that being said, we did adopt our little guy, and so this next year I'm going to have a 21-year-old, a high school senior, a high school freshman, and a kindergartner. So, and I'm 41 myself, so I have the whole gamut, and I kind of started over again. We continued to do foster care during that time. We had some respite, which is short-term temporary care for kids. We had 2 little boys that we had for a month, and then their adoptive placement fell through in a very sad and tragic way, and they were returned to us, and then we had them for another 6 months, but we were able to move them on to beautiful parents, and we're still involved in their lives and close with them. And so we're very grateful and thankful that that connection still remains to those little boys, and we get to be aunt and uncle and watch them grow up, because that doesn't always happen in foster care. Sometimes if children are adopted out or moved, you don't know what happens to them, and so we're lucky and we're blessed. So we sent those boys on their way, and then we decided to make a fresh start and move, and we bought what we thought was our dream home. We were going to die and live forever. And we moved in there in spring of 2013. And it was amazing. It was on land, and it was, we had animals and donkeys and chickens and gardens, and just a really cool ranch-style house. And we were outside all the time and had a beautiful pool, and it was really, really cool to be able to have that home. And I was even more grateful because I had my 4 kids I always wanted, and we had taken a break from foster care, and I was gardening and entertaining, and life was beautiful. But the call to be a foster mom still wasn't gone. And so after being there a while, we decided, well, let's do it again. So we opened our home back up, and we did some respite care. And I said I'm highly intuitive and, and super connected to Creator and Source. And so I realized that traditional domestic foster care wasn't really where I needed to be. And I got called to shift our license over to Catholic Charities. They have an international refugee foster care program in this part of the world and in others. And I went to Catholic Charities, and we got it licensed over there and became refugee foster parents. We had 2 boys who were from Eritrea that came and lived with us for a short period of time, about a month, and they were really, really beautiful boys, and just, we had they were just grateful, and really, foster care was hard for my kids, my biological kids. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I was not available to them. I was highly stressed at times. I was checked out. I was consumed with the world of foster care and not available to my biological children. And so there were times that they were shortchanged. And I will just say that and be honest about that, because it's the truth. There were times that I didn't show up for my kids because I was busy showing up for other people's kids that were wounded. And luckily my kids had a strong and solid foundation, and they were able to look at it and see, wow, and get outside themselves. But it wasn't easy for them, and it was challenging. And I recognized the ways that while it was beautiful for them to also give alongside me and share, and the lessons that they learned, it was really hard for them too. And so that's important to note, because as I talk about my journey, I want to talk about the pain. and the challenges and the struggles, and it's not always pretty. Sometimes it's really, really hard. And I have an essay online called Guardians, and if you Google Sarah Green and the word Guardians, that's one of the first things that I published over at Brainchild Magazine, and you'll be able to read about how hard it is, And I think it's important to note that it's hard. The blessings far outweigh the challenges, but it's hard work. But I'm saying all that to say that my son really connected with these boys from Eritrea, and they could not stay with us long term. It was just a temporary placement, but they still contact us, and we're Facebook friends. And my son really enjoyed having those boys around, and they were a blessing. And then after that, we took a young lady from Guatemala. I call her Flower. She was one of the children that came across the border during the the Great Migration of a lot of the youth that came across our border in 2012, 2013, and she came from a detention center to try to reunite with her mom, who lived close to us. And she was a pistol. She was a handful, and my husband and I fell totally in love with her, and would have adopted her. Obviously, it wasn't possible because she had a biological family close by. But after she was placed with me a while, social services decided that placement with her mom full-time wasn't ideal and wanted her to stay with us. And she was in school and she was doing okay. But let's just say I don't really want to tell too much of her story because it's hers and I need to get her permission to do that. But she just kind of didn't want to follow the rules and was doing what some of the behaviors that teenage girls do. And it was determined that by ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, with whom I strongly disagree, but they determined that the best thing for her was to be taken back to a shelter, a residential treatment facility. And so with virtually no notice, she was yanked out of our house and put on a plane and basically locked away. And I don't want to get too political, but, pay attention to the fact that these tens of thousands of children that flooded across our border, nobody knows where they are and no one's hearing their stories. And just check in with that and do some research on your own, because my feeling is that we have children that are being warehoused and they're being just kind of locked up and out of sight, out of mind. And regardless of what you think about the political climate and immigration, we need to remember that these are children. And I have heard their stories firsthand, and I know where they come from. And I just spent some time earlier this year in Guatemala, and so what I will say is that these are babies. And babies deserve safe places, and they deserve roofs over their heads. And they deserve to live free from violence and from sexual assault and from threats of rape and murder and having their families killed in front of them. And I'll get off my soapbox now. Anyway, so after Flower left, I started to really evaluate what the toll that foster care took on the family. And I realized that what I wanted to do was to serve a lot of children at once. I wanted to serve bigger. And I started to really pray and ask to be guided, to be shown how I could serve. And that was it. How do I serve? How do I serve? And I knew one child at a time is totally noble, but I wanted to really show up and do, serve kids that were hurting and disenfranchised on a larger scale. And so I said, show me, teach me, Spirit, show me, teach me, God. And I started to listen. And so where I went from that was to, It's funny how spirit works and these little breadcrumbs that you get dropped in your life and the way that people show up and opportunities show up. And if you listen and you're not afraid, which I'll tell you right now, I've had to do some scary stuff and I have been afraid and I have not wanted to, and I have gone kicking and screaming. But what I learned from, doing foster care, and what I learned from the voice that told me, this is your son, what I learned from that is that if I get out of my own way and I go where I'm being guided and I show up and say yes to spirit, beautiful things happen. When it's not beautiful is when you start to manipulate situations and try to take control and try to make it happen the way you think it should happen. If you can get your fingers out of the way and let go and let God do her thing, as I say, it's amazing the stuff that shows up. It's bigger and better than you could have ever dreamed. And I need to go back probably next week and listen to myself say this again and practice what I preach. But we all know it's easier to tell the story and say, this is how it needs to be. And then sometimes we get so in our monkey mind and so in our heads that we forget. But so I started to pray, I want to serve more and I want to go bigger and I want to, bring me all the babies, God, bring me all the babies, is what I said. So, and I wasn't just talking about infants, I was talking about all the hurting children, bring them all to me. And so in December of 2013, I started to feel like I was going to have to sell my dream, or this was 2014, I believe. Yeah. I started to say, I'm going to have to sell my dream home. I started feeling like we've only been here a year and a half, but we're going to have to leave, and I don't know why, but I just felt that coming. Also in December, I came across an ad on Facebook for a trip to Teotihuacan in Mexico with the Miguel Ruiz family. Miguel Ruiz that wrote the Four Agreements, and if you haven't read that, you should do that right now, today, and make it happen in your life because it will transform everything for you. But there was a trip to Teo, and you could go, and it was kind of a spiritual journey, and I thought, man, I want to go, and I mentioned it to my husband, and he came to me 2 days later with tears in his eyes and a check in his hand and said, go on that trip. You've got to go. It was impressed upon me. I don't really understand it, but you have to go on that trip. And so I did. And through that trip, I met a lot of beautiful people. My friend Raquel, my sister friend, and I reconnected with a friend of mine that I haven't seen since I was 15 or 16. She happened to be on the trip. And I came back from the trip really inspired by that part of the world and feeling like a calling to that Mayan and Aztec time period. And so I started to kind of look at what kind of work I could do, and I decided to take all of this therapeutic parenting I'd done and the fact that everybody called me with parenting problems and my own, innate kind of intuitive gifts, where people were calling me kind of as a life coach and calling me to kind of do psychic readings for them and help them figure things out. And I decided to open the doors on a business and combine all of that. And I'd done some energy medicine training or energy work training. And I thought, I'm going to open a business. I'm going to help families. And so in February of 2015, I did. I opened Heartlight Services, and I thought, well, the worst thing that can happen is I can fail. Built a website, rented a space, threw a sign on the door, told people what I was doing. Bring me your kids that are troubled. Bring me your family problems. I will do parenting coaching. I'll do, whatever needs to be done here. We'll look at the situation and we will heal it. And it went gangbusters. And I also, through that process, earlier, my oldest daughter, she kind of struggles, and I was looking into kind of how to help her with some of her issues. And I touched base with some of the people from the trip to Teotihuacan and was guided to a group called the Four Winds Society, because I said, I feel like, and I don't even know why I feel like this because I don't really know anything about it, but I feel like I need a shaman to help my daughter. I feel like I need to look into shamanism. And so through that guidance to Four Winds, I looked into shamanism, and I said, man, they've got a really cool energy medicine course that really looks like it addresses trauma and some of the things that I see in my foster kids and some of my clients that are coming through my doors, and I'm going to go do that. And so I did. And so what is normally a 2 to 4 year program, I decided I was just going to go kind of all out, and I would take this course, and I did it in 6 months, and I completed it. And it was one of the most beautiful and powerful times in my life. I was able to heal the things in myself that needed healing, and not that I'm perfect now, because we all have things that need to be healed at all times. But I did a lot of deep soul work, and I did a lot of looking at myself and healing of relationships and getting really clear and honest. And then I brought all of these gifts of this beautiful, beautiful energy medicine practice through Four Winds and through their Light Body School back into my office. And I started using what I was learning on my clients. And I mean, people physically transformed. I had one female client that inspired me so much because she would come into my office and the work that we were doing was so hard, and she would cry and she would have a headache when she left, but she kept showing up. And she showed up and she showed up and she showed up. And at the end of 6 months, she looked like a different person. She came back for kind of a touch-up session recently, and I didn't even recognize her. I did not physically recognize her, and I had to do a double take. And I just started watching people's lives transform through this energy medicine. And I was like, man, this is some powerful, powerful stuff here. And it is, it's something. I use it on myself. I use it in my practice. The techniques and the tools that I learned through Four Winds are primarily what I use now. It's what people feel called to, soul retrievals or beautiful things where we can really go in and look at things that have occurred in people's lives and turn challenges into opportunities. And really, I think the basis of what happens in my office is turning challenges into opportunities and shifting how we look at things and allowing things to be gifts instead of wounds. And so I'm just blown away by even though I've been certified by Four Winds for less than a year now, I'm blown away by the power of what can happen, and recommend their program. There's a lot of other good programs out there, and I did some healing touch courses, and I've taken Love and Logic trainings as part of my parenting stuff. And Love and Logic, if you're a mom out there and you're struggling, get thee to a Love and Logic course or their website or read their books, because that's some powerful stuff. Trauma-based relational intervention by Karen Purvis is another tool. She, I jokingly say that I want to be Karen Purvis when I grow up, and she recently passed away, and the legacy that she left for children is amazing. She is just a light in this world and for hurting kids, and the work that she did lives on at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, and she's just inspirational. And so if you've got hard kids, there's so many different tools out there that are off the beaten path. There's energy medicine, there's aromatherapy, there's acupuncture, there's Reiki, there's TBRI, there's Love and Logic, there's sound healing, there's so many things out there. Just go do some exploring, because there are beautiful tools in this world that are outside the beaten path and outside the mainstream, and I see them happen, or I see those tools be used and change lives with my clients every day. So, keep looking until you find what works, because there's always hope. There's always hope for healing. Through Four Winds, it's because, remember, my prayer was serve more, serve more. So, and people started to come through the office, and then families started to come in, and I offer a sliding scale discount for families so that I can, serve an entire family, because I found that if I can really get in and work with mom and dad and brother and sister, and I've even had families where it was like 12 members, aunts and uncles and grandparents and extended family coming in. And so I work that rate when I have large groups like that, because I love seeing what happens when we get everybody on board and we get everybody working together. I love it. So anyway, so that was happening. But then I started to kind of be shown some other things that I thought were really interesting. And one was that the kiddos that come in, not the adults, because the adults have all these beliefs instilled and installed in them. And I'm going to have a drink of my coffee. The adults have all these preconceived notions and things instilled. You tell an adult, you can do this work on yourself. You can heal yourself. They go, can you just do it for me? I just think I need you to do it. But I started to see with the kiddos that came into my office, I work with the chakra system, and I work with the physical body and the energy body. And I would ask my kids, so where do you think this sits? This fear or this anxiety or this behavior issue, where do you feel it in your body when you're experiencing this? And 100% of the time over the last year, the kids that came through my door could show me. So I have a little test that I run with these kids where, I can I use a little pendulum and I go through and I test it out. That helps me look and see where their stuff sits, where the healing needs to occur in the energy body when I'm working with them. These kids knew. They knew. They all know. And so then I started to kind of get still in meditation and say, I'm onto something here. I am onto something. And there's something here for me. And I started dreaming and seeing these children kind of doing this series of hand motions and healing their issues themselves. And so that led me to saying, there's a method to this madness here. And there is. And so what I developed in my practice is something called the Indigo Aztec method. That name was kind of given to me. It was given to me through a friend of mine that I did some work with. His name is Bill Foss. I'll talk more about him in just a minute. But Bill Foss, I did a session with him. He does beautiful work with Akashic Records and past lives and beautiful healing work. And he's a gifted musician and artist. And the Indigo Aztec method was kind of given to me through him, through some session work that I was doing with him. And it's what I have named and coined this series of hand motions that I have kind of distilled down into this really easy little process that I can teach kids how to do on themselves to where they can heal themselves. And so I've started kind of doing it in the practice, and it's awesome. These kids are doing it. These kids are taking this little mantra, this little prayer, this little stories, kind of mnemonic thing that I've put together with the help of with God and with Bill, and I've put this little thing together to where they have this series of hand motions and they can heal themselves and they can heal other people. And so I'm empowering these little guys. I'm watching them in the office and they're like, this is so cool. Look what I can do for myself. The only problem is I'm running myself out of business because they all have these tools and techniques now, and so they don't need me. But them not needing me is the biggest gift ever, because it means I've empowered them and I've given them these tools they can use to go out into the world to heal things when they need to be healed, and they don't have to find an expert. And so they'll grow into adults that believe, hey, I can do this. I can do this. And so Bill, his website is billfoss.net. You can Google Bill Foss. Bill, I think it's .net. If it's not, I'm sorry, but you can go Google Bill Foss and you can see his work. Bill and I have now partnered on a workbook called Heal Your Feelings, the Indigo Aztec Method Workbook for Children. And that is going to be coming out this month. We are just about finished. And so I will be, talking about it, obviously, and plugging it a little bit on this show, and telling everybody where to get it and how to get it. But I'm really excited about this workbook. It's 60-something pages that's going to give kids tools to heal themselves and heal others, and teaches them about how important their intention is, and their thoughts and their words and what they're putting out there into the world, and how important that is. And it's kind of this baby that was given to me by the Creator to kind of put out into the world and to share with kids. And so this summer, in addition to doing session work with clients, I'll be teaching this method, and I'm also going to be certifying teachers that can take it out into the world and teach it too. And my goal is to set up a nonprofit that will take these workbooks and take me into the places where kids are really hurting, to the developing countries and to the refugee camps, and be able to translate this book into other languages and take it to the places where it's really, really needed. I wish I could work for free, and I always keep pro bono spots in my office to work with special cases, because I believe in the work that I do. I believe in energy medicine. I believe in its ability to heal things and heal trauma and to change lives. I believe in shamanic practice as a way to transform families and individuals and future generations. But unfortunately, I have to feed my children, and I can't afford to work for free. And so, but hopefully, Indigo Aztec Method will be able to kind of fund its own nonprofit so that I can take it into the place where it's most needed and serve people that need the work, that don't have the resources to afford it. So that's kind of my long-range plan. And, I got all the way here from hearing the call to be a foster mom, and walking into a hospital and hearing a voice say, "This is your son," and listening to that voice, and then also asking Spirit, "Why am I here? Show me, teach me, show me, teach me, show me, teach me." Carolyn Miss says, "Hover over me, God. Hover over me, God." And I say that prayer multiple times a day. And one of my other teachers says, when you call Spirit answers 100% of the time. So when Spirit calls you, you got to show up 100% of the time. And it's been scary, in my personal life. I am transitioning out of my marriage right now. My husband is a beautiful, beautiful and talented and fabulous man, and we have created a beautiful partnership and a beautiful family. But our time as a couple has come to an end, and we are honoring and respecting everything that we built together, and staying beautiful co-parents and friends. And my relationship with my oldest daughter continues to be strained and somewhat estranged. And there are hard times. There are hard times going on a journey where you're saying, "I want to serve," and then you show up and say, "Yes, sometimes hard things are required of you. Sometimes you have to let go of the things that are no longer meant for you, or you have to put things aside in your life for a little bit so that you can show up for spirit, and that you can show up for what you're meant to do and what your soul contract is and what your soul purpose is, and the purpose that God put you on this planet. Sometimes you gotta do hard things. And I am, people come to me and look to me kind of as a spiritual teacher, and I guide them the best I can. That doesn't mean that I don't have days where I say, this is hard. And sometimes I curse a little on this program, I'm so sorry, but this shit is hard. And I don't want to do it another day. I just want to go back to the 2009 me, where I was like going to Pilates classes and laying by my pool and working on my tan and having people over for barbecues and just being a housewife. Sometimes that's easier. But the problem is, once your eyes are open and once you see all of the blessings that can begin to occur when you start asking the hard questions and you start saying, why am I here? Show me, teach me, and then you show up and say yes, man, that's where the juice is, guys. That's where the juice is. So it's not always beautiful and it's not always perfect, and sometimes it looks like everything is falling apart, and I'm here to tell you sometimes it is, but it's falling all apart so that it can come back together. And so while I'm undergoing personal transition in my relationship, and it's not without pain and it's not without heartache, I know that I'm going where I'm guided, and I'm going to screw it up, and I'm going to take a wrong turn sometimes, and I'm going to be human, and I'm going to resist, and I'm going to be unforgiving, and I'm going to be unkind, and because we're people. I'm not going to get it perfect all the time, but I know where I'm going. I know that I've been given the gift of this book, and I have this beautiful show now, and I'm going to bring people on the air that will hopefully kind of share their stories, and it'll be informative for you guys, and you'll be able to learn more and learn about yourself or the world and ask questions. And I'll take calls in the very near future about life purpose stuff, family stuff, challenges that you're undergoing with your kids. We'll do a whole hour of just parenting questions and struggles and challenges being answered by me, an intuitive family builder and energy medicine practitioner. There's a lot of good stuff coming up on this program, and then with my book. And I know that the next phase of my life has, because of what I've been showing me doing some work in developing countries and being able to travel and take my children with me into other parts of the world, and hopefully touching lives that way. And so you just gotta sometimes knuckle down and get through the tough parts. And that's what I'm hoping that through sharing my story today, and trying to be really real and honest, I'm inspiring you guys to do, is to ask. If you've ever wondered what's my purpose, you'll be shown. You just have to listen. And, if you need to contact me ever through my website, heartlightservices.com, I'm happy to, answer emails from my listeners at Sarah, SARAH, at heartlightservices.com. If there's ever anything that you're struggling with or that you want to work through, I'd love to have some email correspondence with you. Next week, I want to talk about who I have coming up on Wednesday at noon. I have an individual named Josh Hurley. He is a former professional skateboarder that is also had an alcohol and drug problem, that was able to cold turkey overcome that, and has a beautiful story to share. And he is also doing similar work to me, where he is just started his own skateboard company called Now Skateboards, and it's just a little local startup, and he's got a dream and he's following a vision and wanting to shift into working with kids and disadvantaged kids and through the zen of skateboarding. So I will be bringing him to you guys next week at noon on Wednesday. That will be, I believe, the 22nd. Thanks for sticking with me, and go let your heart shine.